All right, good evening, everybody. It is 7 o'clock, and I would like to call the Monday, January 24th meeting of Kimberley City Council to order. Thanks, everybody, for being here tonight. Welcome back, Councillor Roberts. We have a content-packed agenda tonight, not that many items, but as you will see later on, a lot of it pertains to the wastewater treatment plant and the grant application that's being put in. So there will be lots of information on that. As a reminder to staff, when you're speaking, we'd appreciate it if you could turn your video on so that both we and those watching on YouTube can see you speak. All right, with that, I'd like to just remind everybody that we're holding this meeting on the homelands of the Ktunaxa peoples and would ask for mover to adopt the agenda. Councillor McBain, thank you. Councillor Roberts seconds. All those in favor? That motion is carried. Next up, we have adoption of the minutes of the regular meeting of council held on January the 10th. Mover, please. Councillor Kiddo, thank you. Councillor McBain seconds. All those in favor? That motion is carried. So we have a couple of delegations tonight, and for the first, which is on the water conservation plan, Chris, can I call on you to introduce our presenter?
Hey, Mr. Mayor and Council, would give me my pleasure to introduce Aaron Lee and Alex Kempa to Council tonight for a presentation on the water conservation plan. They're with Urban Systems, and we had the pleasure of working with them on this. Great team, and look forward to their presentation.
All right, Aaron, take it away.
Thanks very much, Chris, for the introduction. Good evening, your worship and council. Thanks for having us here tonight. It's been a very good process, as Chris described. We're grateful to staff for how they've collaborated and how they've guided us throughout this entire assignment. There is some history with water conservation in the city, and we wanted to make sure that we could capture as much of that as we could as we chart forward over the course of the next 5 years. So today we're going to present the summary of that water conservation plan and engage in some discussion as you all see fit. We have 10 content-full slides. So I'm wondering there if someone can load those up or if that one is up to me.
I'm going to share it from my screen.
Wonderful. Thank you. Perfect. So as I was saying, we have 10 contentful slides. So let's begin. Next slide, please. We've always found that moving in a good direction helps with a bit of a prevailing wind. And in water conservation, that prevailing wind often comes from a good philosophy or a good tagline, something that motivates us towards purpose and doing things well. So we find that water is a precious resource, and we aim to use it wisely. This statement really does guide us in terms of getting started and thinking about our purpose for trying to reduce water. There's a little bit more than just philosophy too. There's a lot of practicality that comes with it. It's a requirement for most senior government funding programs to have an updated and recently endorsed within the last 5 years water conservation plan. And that date that says January 26th with the latest ICIP, that was just changed in the last few business days with a month extension. But still, this large fund that exists for all future applications, very important to have a current endorsed by council water conservation plan. So earlier this year, with that good foresight, staff initiated this overall review. And today we just wanted to present that summary for you. Again, that endorsed plan provides both a means to be able to live out this purpose, to remain compliant with grant programs, and to also go about reducing water use. Next slide, please. So drivers are what motivate us to succeed. And in this case with conservation, to use less. In the water conservation plan, we have 5 primary drivers. One is to be resilient, to have a resilient water supply, and to make sure that we maintain that resilient stream flows within our source watersheds. 2, to have a sustainable water service delivery, including civic leadership and being able to optimize our infrastructure. 3 is to prolong asset life in both sewer and water utilities. 4 is to be compliant with those grant programs. And 5 is to be well prepared to accommodate and welcome future customers. So these 5 drivers really do permeate the majority of the plan that we see within these slides here and within the attached report. Thankfully, we're not starting from square one. There is a solid history here, and it goes back well more than 10 years. Those of you who have been around for some time perhaps remember the Columbia Basin Trust's Water Smart program, where it began to make it a lot more popular throughout the region to reduce water use and to safeguard water sources. And most communities have a water conservation history that goes well before that, but there has been perhaps another bar or another level of water conservation that has initiated since then. So this is more about reinitiating and reestablishing the kinds of things that the program should include over the next 5 years. And those efforts over history have started to decrease water use in some areas. But as we'll explore a little bit more in the next few slides, there is room to improve. And this plan is an attempt to spell out how. So let's talk a little bit more about those improvement areas and what the context for water use in the city is. Next slide, please. So just before we dive into the structure of the overall plan, it's helpful to consider the 4 pillars of demand management. And these 4 pillars on the left-hand side, which help to manage how water is used, are popular and useful all over North America, all over the developed world, where water conservation is a priority. Those 4 pillars include education, regulation, economics, and technology. Education includes information materials, one-on-one consultations and conversations, and online tools, including social media. Regulation includes things like water restrictions, stage restrictions, pricing set points, and other bylaws that are used to build infrastructure and maintain it. 3, economics, such as rebates, incentives, and how you go about making investments to steward the water system and the watersheds well. And technology, such as network simulations, water meters, and information management. So as we take those best practices and those pillars from a lot of the other conservation plans that we've been able to work on, we use them as we begin to answer some of these core questions that founded the plan in the first place. And those are on the right-hand side of the slide. So what have we learned about local water use patterns and customer behaviors? What efforts have we tried to date, and which ones worked well? What new or persisting challenges do we face? What does our OCP and our local policies say about conservation? And which measures do we support and want to set aside resources for? The good thing about questions is it kind of gets us thinking about how to solve problems, recognizing that there are issues that we want to address. And those 4 pillars, again, provide us some guidance in the ways that we work through the analysis, assess those findings, and then begin to pull the package together as one coherent plan. Just before we get into the plan elements themselves, it does make sense to look again a bit closer at water use context locally. Next slide, please. So looking at today, we can see that British Columbians on average use about 500 liters per capita per day. And the rate in Kimberley is higher at about 1150. Now, it's normal to make comparison between communities, but we got to make sure that we don't just stop there, because that really isn't an apples to apples comparison. So the actual local scene for water use is where we begin to maybe get away from some of the generalities and start to dive into some of the specifics, because those specifics do inform the best kinds of priorities to pick as part of the plan. So first off, that customer mix is key. I'm here on the right-hand side of the slide. We have golf courses, a ski hill, and other industrial properties, which alone account for an equivalent population of about 750 additional people. There's nothing wrong with the fact that these are customers. This is great to have as part of a community. It just helps to put that in perspective, because not every community in BC where these averages come from are equipped with the same type of customer mix. Second, it's good to note that overall consumption is down about 15% from 2018 to 2020. And that 3-year average is kind of a basic benchmark for us in the water conservation world, because the rates do change. The total consumption does change from year to year. Looking at things over a 3-year average gives us a better picture about whether the trend line is up about the same or heading down. So some of your efforts have reduced in the past, and they continue to do so. Part of the need for the conservation plan is to look at that trend and see if we can't kickstart it and make a few more outcomes, a little bit better results going forward. Number 4, in terms of that customer mix and understanding how water is being used today, leakage and losses are distributed, which makes it a tough thing to turn around quickly. It takes time. And no surprise, like most communities in BC with great summers, outdoor use is high. Even if it is short, those great summers do create higher outdoor use. And second, in the bottom right here, it's very important to consider when we think about local water use is that less demand and space for growth kind of go hand in hand. So with a 2% growth rate, it's really important that we don't compare the total consumption, like the total volume, how big is that bucket from, let's say, 2021 to 2020? Because part of it is because population is rising. It's a good chance that even while you're conserving, your rate per person is going down, the total volume of water consumed in a year may still be going up. Second, new customers and building turnover does allow for new plumbing fixtures and behavior change. And keep in mind that some of your new residents are already coming with a high conservation mindset. And fortunately, the last bullet there, education, new programs, incentives, those work on all types of customers. We have found the effectiveness across the industry very strong, new people and for customers who have been around for a long time. So recognizing the growth consideration in your customer mix, this gives us a much better picture with how to devise a water conservation plan rather than just a simple average to the provincial one. Next slide, please. All right, so when we think about assembling some of what works well, and those of us who work a lot with public policy, it's important to kind of take stock of what we have today and what's working well and to try to turn that up a little. In the past, the city and other communities within the region have been able to work together on an ambassador program. And those generally work well. The feedback from the individuals who have the one-on-ones, as well as the ambassadors themselves, and then from the utility measurement side, the results are solid. This is about people talking with people, and it has an impact. This is about pointing out opportunities to reduce water use at their home that actually yields results. A second historical category that's worked well are restrictions. And this is about communities working together and the feeling of together by individuals where there are shared challenges. So communal water restrictions are a fairly equitable way for everyone to contribute to reduced use. And those restrictions come in at different stages throughout the year. And we'll talk a little bit more about a very fundamental way you can make some shifts within your plan based on the fact that restrictions have worked so far and they could work even further better. And then, of course, on the less waste side of things, passive conservation measures, which is those things that are not taking a required direct investment by folks and or a lot of behavioral change, they can have big effects too, because they can be distributed across a lot of behaviors by a lot of people rather than just a concentrated group. This is about fixing leaks, replacing hardware, and managing pressure. You have some history with this. It has helped. And part of the plan will be to encourage that to continue going forward. And that's about reducing excess use where it's not required. Next slide, please. So with that historic look and a more deeper dive into some of the water use patterns of recent, we've kind of got 5 needs and opportunities that relates to how the plan was pulled together. First is this notion of building awareness. This is getting more people in the know about their use and how to save. And this could be reminders for some folks who've heard some similar messages before, but as we found with conservation plans, they start, but they never really end. And a lot of priming and reminding becomes helpful. This is where there's a lot of tools in a toolkit for building awareness, and a lot of them are publicly available. 2 is rebates. This has some history. You have some rebate experiences dating back 5-6 years ago. They worked, and they do incentivize action. And we generally find across all communities in BC that when they're structured right, there is a good uptake. Often that uptake exceeds what the program allows. And that's something to consider as you go forward, is creating an allotment and working within that allotment each year. 3 is to continue to measure. And you do this in select spots, which helps inform the utility as to where to go deeper, to restore leaks, repair leaks, and to find places where there's excess use that doesn't have to be there. 4, utility tools. Again, models and simulations can help to pinpoint those hotspots where you can dive a bit deeper. So one example is most people view a water system as just one large kind of net of pipes, all operating under the same conditions. In actuality, there's a bunch of different subzones, and those subzones can operate differently depending on leaks and pressure. And so being able to get quite specific about how to put that zone in its perfect place and to be able to find and locate leaks that may actually not be that distributed, but actually concentrated, well, these models and simulations can help realize those things. So that takes large, big picture problems, abstract things, and turns them into specific lists to address. And the 5th item around needs and opportunities is resources. So modern rate structures to lock in low use and raise funds for conservation. Most of this is quite modest when you look at the kind of plan going forward for the next 5 years. We think that there's quite a few, low-hanging fruit, some early wins that can be achieved. But still, when you begin to stack a couple of programs on top of each other, it's important for the utility to be looking forward to say, we need to make sure that we have adequate resources to spend enough to realize the results that we seek, to realize the drivers that we have for this plan. Next slide, please. So the water conservation plan is oriented around a 20% drop by 2026. It seems like a notable number. When we do the comparison to other communities in the region, it suggests this is doable. And when it compares to other cities in the province, it still affords you some of the time and space to tackle some of these longer term, multi-decade issues. It's a good drop. It does seem like quite a bit, but when the grand scheme of things, looking at some of the information that we have, we think it's quite doable. And these 4 pillars of the water conservation plan have been designed specifically to try to achieve that. And not each pillar represents about a quarter of that 20%, being that there's 4 pillars, but we would be surprised at the same time if they all contribute in some way in a shared manner to make that 20% happen. The first pillar is water use awareness. We talked about ambassadors and their effectiveness, and the suggestion is to continue to bring them back. Educate and promote for wise water outdoor use. Of course, outdoor use still occurs, and it's not that there's an elimination of outdoor use. It's about being able to use the right amount to keep our lawns healthy and reasonably green, and not going over that to the point where we get to excess. Looking at some civic leadership and installing meters at all remaining civic properties that don't currently have them, and including institutional too. This is a chance to better understand how water use is happening at some individual sites and show that leadership, but also it really gets down to the granularity of how the system is being operated and where those leaks might be. The more meters that you can get in the ground, the more likely you are to locate and understand the scale of leakage in some areas. And to continue to calibrate network meters, because that information quality is really, really important. Second, on the right-hand side of the slide, it's bringing back the rebate program to build from that historic success, bring back some of those low flow toilet rebates and shower head kits for customers, and to budget accordingly to create those incentives. Again, installing these at civic facilities is another demonstration of leading by government. The program does come with a modest resource account to it, so it's important to make sure that that can be budgeted for. And just to go through, as you normally would do with water and sewer utility rates, about every 5 years or so, is to update some of those to make sure that the program that's outlined here can be accommodated. From our quick glance, we think it's very doable, but it would require a couple of tweaks. Next slide, please. Third pillar is amending restrictions. And so what we found over the last few years, not just here in Kimberley, but in other places too, is that the summers are getting longer and hotter. And when we start to find out when our supplies are beginning to show the effects of earlier snowmelts, is that we're seeing that period of the desire to use outdoor water and that period of ample watershed water is actually happening earlier in the year. So the first part is that the climate is kind of telling us we're going to want to make sure we manage our water use well throughout the year, given that summers are a bit longer. The second thing that we notice, especially here in Kimberley, is that the initiation of restrictions, that most people go from perhaps some regular type outdoor use straight to using it maybe a couple of times a week. They're not bringing out the hose every single day. They're not bringing out the hose even every other day. Often they're limiting their water use and they're complying with restrictions quite well. So instead of having this small window of maybe odd days and even days, what we're finding is about two days a week is working well for the majority of residential customers. So given that the climate is pushing us this direction and a lot of customers operate this way, our suggestion is to initiate those restrictions earlier at about June 1st. And then to continue to communicate the effectiveness of some of those shifts and to continue to provide updates to the community about how total use is dropping or not, and the condition of source supply throughout the year. Again, this is kind of where some of the pillars become integrated in terms of amending restrictions and how that relates to building awareness. On the right-hand side, to continue to promote the value of water, updating water rates to reflect new programs and to prepare for rising utility costs from other drivers such as asset management. It needs to be gradual and predictable and steady, but at the same time, being prepared for some of those things, including the cost of escalation and inflation. Those are good, so that escalation and inflation doesn't take up the resources that you might need for important programs like water conservation. Two, to continue to fund and put investments into tracking down and repairing sources of leaks and losses. And I think I heard a little bit of conversation at the start about how important that was. And lastly, leakage in water systems is about money lost when water escapes. And I is about being able to reduce the amount of water that comes in at a cost to the sanitary system. This isn't a direct water conservation issue, but it came up often in our plan. And so just some encouragement in terms of extending the life of the wastewater treatment plant to conduct some I inflow and infiltration work on the sewer side as well. And any indoor reductions on the water side will help in that regard. Next slide, please. I'm just sensing the time and I'll wrap it up here quick. When we began, we wanted to make sure we applied the 4 best practices, these pillars of education, regulation, economics, and technology. Established a 20% reduction by 2026. Very feasible given where water use is at today, but at the same time doable in terms of being able to carry it out through 4 pillars about building awareness for water use, bringing back some fixture rebates, amending those restrictions and those stage restrictions timing to get ahead of outdoor use, and continuing to promote the value of water and making smart investments back into the water system. And we hope that with these pillars, this goal, and this water conservation plan, that it begins to feel that that prevailing wind, that philosophy is taking root. You know, that water is a precious resource and that we do aim to use it wisely. That's the plan summary. Happy to work with Chris and others to answer any questions. Thank you.
Excellent, Aaron. Thanks very much for the presentation. Councillor McBain.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. That was a really good job of being concise with a lot of information. One question I have, it kind of goes to the awareness. Absent of having water meters on residential properties, how are you measuring how effective that component is, and how are you applying that to your model calibrations? I mean, I understand, instituting at some of the larger buildings to get a better understanding, but how are you addressing the residential awareness?
Through your worship, that's an excellent question. I guess part of the answer is that in some ways you really can't, but in some ways you can help to improve some of the estimates that you make. So most people install meters primarily as a tool for informed information and to help manage the utility better. And I'm sure you can appreciate that part of it. So most places have got the meters installed so that they can make better choices about capital. They can make better choices when they run their model, and they don't have to rely as much on big picture assumptions that can be expensive when you're trying to rely upon them in the long run. But water meters themselves too have a bit of a cost. So it's good to make sure that those things are balanced. What we found to be an effective way to improve those estimates is things like zone meters. So these are municipally owned meters that you install, maybe about half a dozen to a dozen throughout the city. And again, that helps to pinpoint where there might be locations of higher use. So that's using technology and information on your side. Third is to continue with that leakage. So what ends up happening is you begin to reduce the leakage that's happening. And it's that process of elimination where, well, if this is going to them and this is going to them, then the rest must be going to this group here. And the last one is getting out in those door-to-doors and having the one-on-one conversations with folks where you begin to change some of the behaviors and reduce them down. You don't really have a strong quantifiable sense about how much they're using, but you can begin to realize some of the behaviors that are likely leading to higher use. So as I was saying at the start, it really is difficult to have better, accurate, precise numbers without meters. But in absence of those, you can put zone meters in key locations and you can spend more time one-on-one with people to just try to get a better sense about how they're using it. It's all estimates without the accuracy, though. Does that help a little?
No, that helps a lot, and it makes a lot of sense from a cost effectiveness standpoint. I was just curious about the methodology that you're implying. So yeah, no, that was good. Thank you.
You bet.
Mr. Goodwin.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. The proposal to tighten restrictions earlier in the summer is likely to be met with a bit of resistance. I know I'm a little resistant to it because we don't have a problem early in the summer. So what would you recommend we say to people when we ask them to cut back on their watering when Mark Creek is running full and the dam is overflowing, we have lots of water in town? How do we talk to people so that they don't just get mad?
Through your worship, You know, emotion and practicality are two of the biggest principles when we think about good communication and good messaging on this. In most years, I think around June 1st, June 15th, the weather will be at a place and the conditions on a watershed will be at a place where I think the message will land. But in some of those years where it is not lining up, where you've still got freshet conditions in the watershed, water supplies are quite plentiful. You can give yourself a little bit of flexibility on that start date to suit it. But second, this is kind of the tough one too on the messaging side, is that often the decisions that you make in June help you to ensure that you have adequate supplies in October. And it is a bit of an extension to work, you know, with the public and with other users to think about how to be out in front of the curve before it happens. But one of the tools that I've seen other communities work well is to bring information and statistics back to talk about what conditions are like in the fall and in the early fall, and how the decisions that we make earlier in the year safeguard us from those stronger, tougher, more lifestyle impacting conservation measures that would need to be introduced a little bit later. You know, we saw in Abbotsford this year what a tough story between floods in the fall and extreme water shortages in around September and October, and what a turn of events that was. But they really did get down to having to cut off almost all use aside from what it took to cook, you know, and to use water indoors. So I think just the early messaging to stave off the future is one helpful one. I can see a further question.
Well, we don't have storage, so it doesn't help us at all to conserve water in a physical sense in the spring for the fall, because the dam isn't built for long-term storage of drinking water. So the only argument might be we get you in the habit earlier, and that will help us in October. But I think starting when it's obvious to people that the river's getting lower and it's getting drier, that would make more sense to most people.
Through your worship, I couldn't agree more. Because so much of this is about behaviors, habits can be your enemy and your best friend. And so being able to help cause the change towards improved water habits early is the ability, when you begin to introduce new measures, to recognize that your baseline might be lower. So if we don't make those interventions a little bit earlier and we're starting at a high clip, it often takes a lot longer to wind it down to the kind of level that suits where the watershed is at. So it's about sort of baselines, and it's about understanding where things are at. So the earlier interventions that you could make so that they're ready to make further measures without having to do the big wind down is always in your favor.
Councillor Roberts.
Pardon me. Thank you, Erin, for your presentation. I was really pleased to see that education is the top pillar on your pillar of 4. I just speaking for folks that are my age, I think we who have lived here for a long time have had so much lovely, wonderful, sweet water that we really do take it for granted. The largest lesson I ever had was being in the city of Beijing, which is a very sophisticated city, and wandering along into a plaza area where there was a fountain. And in fact, the people had to come out of their house with a glass of water and a toothbrush to be able to brush their teeth at the fountain. And it dawned on me, oh my God, not everybody has the luxury that we do. So I really feel that the piece that is really going to be the hardest yet the most productive has got to be that education piece, where we start having a different way of looking at how we use water and why we shouldn't be leaving the water running while we're brushing our teeth, and why we should be, doing things somewhat differently, simple habits that we've acquired because we've had that luxury. So that's why I feel it's really important that that piece be on the top of the list.
Thanks, Erin. Just a comment, really. I really don't think we spend enough time thinking about that. We're at the top of the watershed. We've got plenty of water, but there's millions of users below us, and that probably needs to be part of the education, that it's not just about Kimberley. We have a responsibility to everyone in the watershed.
do we have a sense for per capita usage that is attributed to leakage?
Oh, that's a very good question. Chris, do you have that number offhand?
I don't offhand know.
Okay, no problem. I think we've made great strides in addressing that issue, and certainly we will continue to. But I guess, as you said earlier, Aaron, the whole issue is one that is extremely multifaceted, and we need to address them all.
Yeah, through your worship, I couldn't agree more. You know, a lot of just to give a little bit more background to some of the leakage, some communities that with newer infrastructure, you know, some of them are in the 5 to 10% range on the leakage side of things. I think the number in Kimberley is a little bit over double that 10%, so into the 20 plus range, which would signal that being able to locate and repair leaks on its own over the next 5 years could signal enough to achieve parts of the plan. You'll never get it down to 0. You'll probably struggle to get it down to less than 5, but it still does mark a significant area for opportunity. So that's part of the reason why we just recommend that you continue to invest in it. Yes, it's multifaceted, and leakage could be one of those areas, although it's difficult to always locate them. But when you do, it can have demonstrable results.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Last call, Council. So we'll be dealing with action on this report a little bit later in the meeting, Aaron. Thanks so much for your presentation. Much appreciated.
Through your worship, thanks very much for having us. We appreciate working for you guys. Have a great night. Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have the British Columbia Social Procurement Initiative. A couple of presenters. Christy, are you going to take the lead on this?
Yes, I'm going to give the main presentation, but I think that Mayor Karen Elliott from Squamish is going to give the initial introduction.
All right, Mayor Elliott, go ahead.
Good evening, Mayor McCormick and Council. Thank you for having us tonight. So I am pleased to be before you, not with my Mayor of Squamish hat on particularly, but as co-chair of the BC Social Procurement Initiative. And I co-chair this initiative with Councillor Colleen Evans from Campbell River. And so this is a topic that I have learned a lot about in the last few years. I'm quite passionate about, so I appreciate the time on your agenda to share what we're up to with Bcsbi. My journey to become fascinated in procurement started in 2019. I had an opportunity to go to Oslo, and I spent some time with one of the folks that works with the city of Oslo on their climate change initiatives. And one of the things I saw when I was there was their first fossil fuel-free construction site. And so I was curious about how that came to be, because we seem so far away from that in North America. And they told me it was all done through procurement, through really engaging with their vendors and through writing really strategic procurement documents. So Squamish is not Oslo, so I had to temper my expectations, but came back to my community, started talking with our procurement folks, and found out about this initiative that had started on Vancouver Island. And so Squamish joined in late 2020. We were the first community outside of the Sunshine Coast, or AVICC, the Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities, to become a member. And in 2021, we have seen from the beginning of the year to the end of the third quarter, about 65% of our procurement now includes a social or environmental value as part of the bid document. And we were starting from nothing at the end of 2020. So even a small community like ours can make quite big gains with social procurement. And this whole initiative is about helping local governments get on board and change the way we do procurement in the province of British Columbia. And so Christy from Scale Collaborative, one of our partners, will walk you through that. And I'm just so pleased to be a part of this, happy to answer questions at the end, and I'll turn it over to Christy, and thank you for having us.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Karen. So Christy, I see you've got about 18 or 19 slides. We'd appreciate it if you could kind of keep that to within about 10 minutes if you can.
Yes, I can. So does somebody else put up the slides, or would you like me to share? Oh, there we go. Thank you. So, oh, I'll just let that get going. Perfect. So good evening, the mayor and members in council, and thank you for hosting our presentation today. As Mayor Elliott said, I am Chrissy Fairholm-Mader. I'm the project manager for the BC Social Procurement Initiative, and I'll be talking about that today. So next slide. Just as an overview, so we're on slide 2. Yeah, just up a bit, up to slide 2. Great, thank you. So just as an overview, the public sector spends billions of dollars through procurement. Approximately 80% of those dollars take place at a local and regional levels. So government spending represents about 13% of Canada's GDP. And so when we think about impact, social value spending and procurement represents a huge opportunity to get the most value for the dollars you spend to the benefit of your community. Next slide. Social procurement is the process of integrating social and environmental outcomes into your purchasing in order to gain that greater value for your community. And this is becoming a best practice. Next slide. So what it is it leverages additional social, environmental, and ethical value from your already existing dollars. So these are dollars that you spend anyways, and it's a way to integrate additional value into it, specifically to be able to maximize the benefit back to your community. Next slide. It's not just about buying social, it's about gaining value for local communities. And it's about being able to integrate buying with a purpose with those values and intention. And so we really believe, and we know because we're an initiative that's, overseen by government and for local governments, is that communities need and understand the challenges that you face, and that the key thing that social procurement does is supports your government to be able to align your spending to your strategic plans and directions. Next slide. And why is this really important? It's because we're seeing that in our communities, we're facing more and more complex challenges, and we need every tool in our toolkit to be able to address those. And so every purchase that you make has an economic, environmental, and social impact regardless. This is a way to think about it and to intentionally direct that social, environmental, and economic impact to the benefit of your community. And in this way, spending can become a tool for building healthy and resilient communities. Next slide. So we're really looking at taking that purchaser value, which is what you need as a government, that supplier value, which is the economic transaction, and being able to add a social value component to that. And out of that, we begin to see greater community value. Next slide. So in real terms, the focus of social procurement allows for economic impact, resilience, and recovery, which is key in the COVID-19 recovery and bounce back. It really is allowing to create inclusive local employment and apprenticeship opportunities. It's able to look at ethical purchasing, living wage, fair trade, to be able to integrate impacts on sustainability and climate. And it also allows for integration of greater equity, diversity, and inclusion into your supply chains. When I look at some of the things that you're looking at around efficient, effective, and environmentally responsible values, and being able to look at reducing your environmental impact and facilitating a diverse economy, which is some of your focus areas, you can look at how your procurement can begin to integrate and achieve those outcomes. So for example, in your most recent janitorial contract that got put out for RFP, you can begin to include things like inclusive employment, living wages, environmental friendly products, contracting with diverse suppliers, and being able to understand what the local economic benefits are and the connection to COVID recovery. So these are some things that can be integrated into your spending to achieve your greater value. And we can look at two different types of spending. There's the social purchasing, which is your goods and services spend, and then there's also your infrastructure and land development. So there's different ways that you can integrate your procurement. Next slide. I won't touch on this more, but we do get questions around, can you do this under fair trade agreements? And yes, you can. Fair trade agreements require that there is open, competitive, transparent process. And by asking social value or environmental value from all your purchasers, it stays true to that fair and transparent process. And the other big question that we get is that it costs more, and we just don't see that that's happening. We see that often businesses and vendors are already thinking about this, and what it does is it enables to value the work that they're doing in order to integrate good business practices into their business. Next slide. So what is the BC Social Procurement Initiative? It's a province-wide member-based collaboration that's supported and funded by the BC government and local governments together to be able to provide the skills, the training, the knowledge in order to bring policy together, align it to your strategic directions, and help you implement the best practices. Next slide. As Mayor Elliott mentioned, it is led for and it's responsive to the needs of local governments. And that's done through a steering committee that helps guide the whole initiative, and that all members are invited to have a presence on so that we can make sure that the initiative is always responding to the needs of our local governments across BC. Next slide. Currently, we have over 30 participating governments and organizations. We do extensive staff training. We have about $250 million so far have been spent with a social environmental lens attached to them, and that is translated into about 100 pilot projects. Next slide. You can get an idea of the members. We work with members that are as small, such as the size of Tofino or Port Hardy, quite rural, Powell River, to larger members such as Victoria and Nanaimo. And as Mayor Elliott mentioned, we're beginning to move and have support to move from what was initially a Vancouver Island and Coastal Initiative to BC-wide, which is why we're talking to local governments across the province. What we do is we provide capacity building support, training, we do impact measurement, supplier outreach, so help to engage with vendors. We have best practices and online resource library. We have policies and templates and guides to help to implement. We provide hands-on consultation and support. And we're building a community of practice and case studies. So if you go to our website, you can see all that's being offered. And the goal is to identify the directions for each member and provide the best practices, training, and support to implement, and then to measure the impact. And so this translates into savings of staff time, as well as learning from the experiences of others and through the implementation of these best practices. Next slide. One thing that we're bringing forward this spring that's really quite amazing is this initiative-wide impact measurement framework that's aligned to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And again, this framework is standardized but can be adapted to meet the needs of your community, and it represents significant cost and time savings for staff. The heavy lifting has been done for you and will benefit from the lessons learned by others. So we really are a learning community together. Next slide. This is who delivers the BC Service Delivery Partners. We have Bisocial, which is a national leader in social procurement implementation, and they do resources development and a lot of training. There's Presentations Plus, who's a supply chain and public procurement expert. They do training and hands-on consultation. Scale Collaborative, we work with social impact and social enterprises and help build the capacity around impact measurement and vendor engagement. And then we have the Vancouver Island Construction Association, who's working with all their construction associations across BC to help, again, build the capacity of the construction sector to respond to social procurement requests, requirements, and outcomes. Next slide. So joining Bcsbi, it's easy, it's very affordable, and it's impactful. It helps make the dollars you spend deliver increased benefits for your community, and it saves time and money for local governments by reducing the work of staff and adding capacity through training, support, and pre-developed tools and templates. That's a really high-level overview. I'm open, and we're both here Mayor Elliott and I are both here to answer any questions that you might have about the content covered or opportunity to join the program. I would like to say the cost to join BC Social Procurement Initiative is aligned to your local regional government fees. So for a community of it's probably about under $1,000 a year to join and participate.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Christy. Good job on covering a lot of material very, very nicely in a short period of time. Councillor McBain has a question.
Yeah, I mean, on the surface, this looks awesome, and I'm really all my questions I think probably can be answered by using some of the resources that you provided here.
Yes.
Because I was trying to get my head wrapped around, you know, how do you measure the social impact? And I guess just my general comment is how, and this might be best delivered to the mayor. How has the public been able to digest this information? Because it just seems like there's and I'm just using this term for this purpose, but a lot of buzzwords in here, a lot of social buzzwords in here, and just how the you know the general public is able to digest this and can kind of translate it into, you know, real world terms. How has that been received?
Thank you for that question through the mayor. I think this is one of the really important things about this initiative is that you would tailor your social procurement policy to the needs and values in your community. So one of the really important things in Squamish is that our cost of living has increased dramatically. And so we're starting to include things around local employment, living wage. We're going to move into looking at local apprenticeship opportunities. And then as a climate emergency community, with a lot of support behind that, we are also now including language around asking people about what they're doing to reduce their GHG emissions if they're working on some of our projects. So the way in which we communicate it to our community is through the values of things that they already hold as very important. So it's not really about convincing them, it's showing them that our procurement is touching on those things that matters to them. And so each quarter when we get our quarterly variance report from our finance department, we include a list of all the procurements that took place in that quarter, how much of that procurement assessment went towards a social or environmental value. So we're trying to be as transparent as possible. And then, as Christy said, that measurement tool, Squamish is one of the communities that's piloting that. And so later this spring, we hope to be able to talk with our community about being really obvious now about, okay, here's what we did through social procurement, and here's the value it brought to our community. And it's that measurement tool, Councillor McBain, that is going to be really the important part about talking to our community about this.
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you for that explanation.
Further, Councillor Oakley.
Thank you very much, Mayor Elliott and Christy, for an excellent presentation. And a lot of information. It's fascinating to hear what's going on in other communities. While we have you here, both of you here tonight, I just wanted to ask our city manager for, without putting you on the spot, Scott, just what your thoughts are on where Kimberley might be able to move with something like this, if there's interest in that.
Thank you for putting me on the spot, Councillor Oakley. You know, I watched the presentation with great interest. I've written down Christy's email address, so I'll follow up and I'll go through some of these resources. But it looks like something that really aligns with our community's values as well. Maybe we're a little bit more on the environmental side than the social procurement side, but I think it's definitely worth looking into, and it seems quite affordable as well. We love to hear things like save staff time, and that would launch us forward a few decades into modern times. So it was a great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Scott. Would anybody like to put Councillor Oakley on the spot? Councillor Dallum.
I just wanted to say thank you both for the presentation. It's excellent to see this being spearheaded with a couple of champions to carry it forward.
All right, further. Thanks very much, Mayor Elliott and Christy. We really appreciate you doing this tonight. We'll look forward to some follow-up in the future.
Thank you
Thanks
so much
very
for having us.
Mayor McCormick.
All
And
right.
if council is looking for a way to move that forward, often we encourage them to just direct staff to get in touch with Scale and do that homework. And I'm happy for any yourself, Mayor McCormick, or any of your councillors to reach out and have a deeper conversation. I could talk about this for quite some time, but thank you for your time tonight.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, the next part of the meeting, we're moving into a fair number of, well, we can call this the Jim Show once again, I think. We've got a number of motions here relating to the financial side of the wastewater treatment plant. Most of it is a formality in order for us to be able to put the grant application in, but there is also a fair amount of new data, updated data that has been in here as a result of the value-added engineering exercise that we've recently gone through. So without further ado, we will start with the Kimberley Wastewater Treatment Plant Project Financial Analysis Update. There are a number of motions here on this, and we have to go through each one of these individually so that they are itemized as part of the the government process. So I think what I would like to do, Jim, if it's okay with you, is we'll start with your comments, and then at kind of the appropriate time here, you can signal for a particular motion to be brought forward. Will that work for you?
Yeah, that's probably the best way to do it, Mr. Mayor. I think what I'll do is just provide an overview of the staff report and then come back to the resolutions, and we can kind of knock them off one by one.
Perfect.
Yeah, and these, they're, as council's aware, there's a lot of information in this report. In large part, the intention of this report is it'll be a document that council can refer back to. We're going to be looking at these numbers for the next 3 or 4 years, potentially, if this project moves forward as planned. So the numbers will be, they'll remain relevant and will be updated as time goes on. So just a brief overview on this report. I presented a report to council on October 25th with a lot of the same information. The title of that report was New Wastewater Treatment Plant Financial Analysis, and the numbers in that report were based on an estimate that was provided to the city in a January 30th, 2021, or January 30th, 2020 design report. So in my October 25th report, I indicated that staff was looking at ways to get that number updated to reflect current construction costs and inflationary increases. And since October 25th, we've commenced the process of a value engineering analysis, which is essentially a peer review of the design report that was completed in 2020. Through that value engineering review, on January 13th, 2022, we received an updated Class B construction cost estimate. So the estimate provided in 2020 was a Class A, and the one we received earlier this month is a Class B estimate. So a little less certain, with a little larger contingency. So the original estimate we were dealing with was 62.57 million. The report increased that to 79.5 million. So that resulted in an increase of about 27% of the previous number. That included a 5% contingency. The grant application that we're going to submit for this project for 73.33% grant funding recommends a 15 to 25% contingency on Class B estimates. So what staff's done in consultation with the province is we've added an additional 10% contingency to that amount to bring it up to an amount that includes a suggested contingency from the province, which brings that up to 87 million, just over $87 million for the construction cost estimate. So that's just for the construction of the wastewater treatment plant. As I noted in my staff report here, that does not include some of the off-site works, including sewer main, new outfall to the river, and decommissioning, demolition of the existing pollution control center, the wastewater treatment plant that we use now. So that adds an extra $8.1 million to the project, which brings the total for the project to $95.2 million. Just take a pause there. So
sorry, Jim, just while we're pausing, I guess a brief comment. That number obviously is a big number, but it's important to understand that we don't pay that, right? The number that we need to be focusing in on, the new number in the report here is 25 million. That's what we're going to be borrowing to. That's basically the envelope that we'll be working within. I think it's important that we don't get too tied up on the 95 million, because the cost is the cost. And it just means that the granting agency, whatever fund we will be going after, are going to have to pay more money for us to get there. But the number we're focusing in on is 25 million.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mr. Mayor. And it's also important to note that this is still an estimate. We're not going to know what the cost of this thing is until it goes out for tender, which probably isn't going to be until sometime in mid-2023, given the fact that the grant application we're applying for, they've indicated that we won't find out whether or not we've got that grant for sure until the spring of 2023. So speaking of the funding, the ICIP grant program that we're anticipating applying to, or we are going to apply to, again, funds 73.33%. So of that 95 million, we're anticipating a $69.8 million grant. We're also anticipating borrowing 26.67% of the cost of the wastewater treatment plant construction, which is 23.25 million. And we're also planning on borrowing 26.67% of the offsite works that I just discussed. So taking just about $2.2 million out of that Kimberley Land Development Reserve. So the result of the borrowing, that 23.25 or $23.225 million in borrowing, borrowing that much money over 30 years at an interest rate of 3%, which is a number that was come up with through discussions with the Municipal Finance Authority. We're looking at annual debt payments, debt servicing cost of just about $1.25 million. So $1,247,167. What we discussed at the last meeting was recovering that on an annual basis through the collection of a parcel tax. We also have the option of collecting it through property value taxes, so just increasing the tax rates. And I do have some information there on both options, both the variable tax and the parcel tax. The variable tax, if you're looking at a house that's valued at, let's see here, just going down to the table. So if you look at a house that's valued at $400,000, it would mean incremental tax collection of $317 a year for 30 years to repay that debt. Jumping up to a house valued at $600,000, you're up to $475,000. So we discussed this a little bit at the last meeting, and I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but if council were to make the decision to fund an additional $1 million or out of the reserve as opposed to borrowing it, we would save about $12.30 a year on a house valued at $360,180, which was the average value in 2021. As I know throughout this report, I've got some disclaimers. These are based on 2021 numbers, so there's lots of assumptions in here, and the numbers will change as we get better information. If we look a little further down in the report, it provides the example of parcel taxes. So that $1.247 million a year debt payment, if we allocate that out based on 4,500 properties, which is again an estimated applicable parcel tax count, it works out to a parcel tax of $277 a year, which is, it's a little bit more palatable. And that would be on essentially every property that has the ability to connect to the wastewater treatment plant. So again, that number will change as the numbers change over the years. And the last little bit of information I've got in the staff report here is just in relation to the operating costs on utility fees. And we're anticipating that increases that we've already made to the sewer utility fees should be enough to fund the higher operating costs that are associated with this new plant. So unless there's any more questions, Mr. Mayor, I'll go back to the resolutions and we can just start working our way through there.
Thanks so much, Jim. Can you just expand a tiny bit more on the parcel tax and the timing, especially around the completion of the tax for the aquatic center? Is there this would start when we're complete with that?
Yeah, it would be roughly the same year. The aquatic center parcel tax, about $40 of that parcel tax relates to the repayment of the debt. We've got annual debt payments of about $125,000 a year right now. So that $40 could, in theory, drop off, which would offset a portion of this debt as it comes on. And I can bring more information on this back to council at another time, but we've also got some debt that's expiring around that same time related to the highway upgrades that were done a number of years ago as well. So that would further offset the cost of this increased debt repayment.
Excellent. Thanks for the question, Councillor Oakley. Further? Okay, Jim. We start
Okay.
at the top. And work
Yeah,
our way.
if you could just start at the top, Mr. Mayor, and just work your way down. And if there's any questions, please stop and ask.
All right, so first up is that a resolution that the Chief Financial Officer staff report dated January 24th, which advises that the most recent cost estimate for construction of the new wastewater treatment plant and associated offsite works is $95,220,375, excluding GST. Councillor Dalla moves, Councillor Kiddo seconds. Any opposed? That motion is carried. Second up is that council directs staff to include in the 2022 to 2026 five-year financial plan, financial plan bylaw, capital expenditures totaling the 95 million just referenced, to establish a budget for the Kimberley wastewater treatment plant project, including associated off-site works and other expenses in the amounts shown in the motion and staff report. Councillor Dalla moves. Councillor Roberts seconds. Any opposed? That motion is carried. Thirdly, that council authorize the submission of an application through the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program Green Infrastructure Environmental Quality for $69,825,101 grant to fund the 73.33% of the estimated cost of the plant. Mover, please. Councillor Kiddo moves and Councillor Roberts seconds. Any opposed? That motion is carried. That council directs staff to prepare a loan authorization bylaw for consideration of 3 readings and eventual adoption, which would authorize the borrowing of up to $35 million over a period of up to 30 years to fund a portion of the Kimberley wastewater treatment plant project, including associated off-site works and other expenses incidental to the project. We'll have mover first. Councillor Goodwin moves. Councillor Dallum seconds. Further discussion. Go ahead, Councillor Oakley.
Jim, I was just wondering about the timelines around 30 years. Is there, is that a set time or are there options on that?
There are options, Councillor Oakley. That 30 years is the longest amortization period that we can have. Of course, as the amortization period gets shorter, the debt payments go up, but we can do it in increments of 5 years. So the next one down would be 25 years, 20 years, and so on.
Councillor Goodwin.
Yes, and Jim, is the interest rate guaranteed for the whole 30 years, or is it still in 10-year increments?
The bond issues that they deal to raise the amount that we're borrowing are in their 10 or 20-year bonds. So the interest rate is locked in for either 10 or 20 years, depending on which bond you go with. And then after that, it's typically 5-year increments that the rate is adjusted on.
Thank you.
Any further? Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. That council directs staff to prepare a reserve fund expenditure bylaw for consideration of 3 readings and eventual adoption, which would authorize the expenditure of up to $2.1 million from the Kimberley Land Development Reserve Fund for a portion of the off-site works associated with the Kimberley wastewater treatment plant project. Councillor Roberts moves. Councillor Kiddo seconds. Go ahead.
Jim, what's the balance in that reserve right now?
After this amount, if this amount were to come out, we would be left with right around just about exactly $5 million.
Thank you.
Further? Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. That council directs staff to include in the city's 5-year financial plan bylaws commencing in the 2026 calendar year sewer utility operating expenditures that include the cost of operating the new Kimberley wastewater treatment plant as detailed in the staff report. Mover, please. Councillor Goodwin moves. Councillor Kiddo seconds. All those in favor? That motion is carried.
Thank you, Council. And I apologize for the number of resolutions there. A lot of those are specific to the grant application that we're submitting. The wording is very deliberate in a lot of those to fit that application.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, and more to come.
Quite right.
Councillor Dallum.
Jim, I just wanted to thank you for keeping the bitter taste to a minimum. That was, thank you for laying it out the way you always do.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
He's not quite finished yet. Okay, next up, we have the City of Kimberley Wastewater Treatment Plant Loan Authorization Bylaw for consideration of 3 readings. First, the first motion is that Council read City of Kimberley Wastewater Treatment Plant Loan Authorization Bylaw number 2703-2022 a first time. Mover, please. Councillor Kiddo, thank you. Councillor Roberts seconds. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. That Council read City of Kimberley Wastewater Treatment Plant Loan Authorization Bylaw 2703-2022 a second time. Councillor Oakley moves. Councillor Goodwin seconds. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. That Council read City of Kimberley Wastewater Treatment Plant Loan Authorization Bylaw 2703-2022 a third time. Mover, please. Councillor Kiddo, thank you. Councillor Roberts seconds. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. That the approval of the electors in relation to the City of Kimberley Wastewater Treatment Plant Loan Authorization Bylaw be sought through the assent voting process, and that the associated voting date be set to coincide with the October 15th, 2022 general local elections. Councillor Dallum moves and Councillor Goodwin seconds. Discussion on this. Jim, can you just make a comment on exactly what we're doing with this?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor. So one of the requirements of a loan authorization bylaw before it's adopted is we have to seek assent of the electors, approval of the electors. And there's 2 different ways of doing that. One is through the assent voting process, which is what we're proposing here. It's essentially, it's just a question on the ballot for the election. And the other method is through the alternative approval process. That's a much shorter process, but it's all it requires is that notice be provided to the electors. So two ads in a local newspaper are required to be published, and if the number of responses received in response to those notices indicating dissent for the proposed bylaws is less than 10%, then elector approval is deemed to be approved. So we had quite a bit of discussion about this at the October 25th meeting, and based on that discussion, I put forward the recommendation in the report.
Thanks. Thanks for that, Jim. I think it's important to note that, you know, for this amount of money, to do an alternate approval process, you know, is a shortcut. And the fact remains that by having this on the ballot as a referendum in the election in the fall, it's not going to cause us to delay this in any way. It's going to fit in with the process. And for this kind of money, I think it's important that we use the referendum process to use it as a communication tool to the community, and that everybody has an opportunity to weigh in. So we will see that as a referendum item in the fall election. Thanks very much for that, Jim. So we'll call the question. Oh, I beg your pardon, Councillor Roberts.
That was exactly my question. Would it delay the process?
Yeah,
But you
no
addressed
delay
that.
in the process at all.
Thank you.
Sorry about that, Sandra. Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. That council directs staff to include in the city's 5-year financial plan bylaws going forward annual debt, principal, and interest expenditures in the amounts detailed in the amortization schedule attached to the Chief Financial Officer's report entitled Kimberley Wastewater Treatment Plan Loan Authorization Bylaw for consideration of 3 readings to establish a budget for the repayment of the proposed long-term borrowing. Mover, please. Councillor Kiddo, thank you. second, Councillor Roberts. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion is carried. And finally, that at the time, City of Kimberley wastewater treatment plant loan authorization bylaw is submitted to the province for their consideration of approval. Subsequent to it receiving first three readings, the province be advised that council intends to fund all or a portion of the related debt servicing costs from revenue collected through the imposition of a parcel tax and to adjust the city's 5-year financial plan accordingly. Councillor Dallin moves. Councillor Roberts seconds. Discussion?
Yeah, yes, discussion. So I'll be voting against this motion because I prefer property value taxes to parcel taxes. I don't think it's fair to charge everyone, no matter how cheap or expensive their house is, the same amount for this. I would rather see it distributed by the value of the property.
Go ahead, Councillor Oakley.
And so will I. I agree with Councillor Goodwin's statement there.
Further comments? All right, hearing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? Councillors Goodwin, Oakley, and Kiddo are opposed. That motion is carried.
Thank you, Council. If I could, Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to say a few words before we moved on to the next report here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just with regards to the proposed borrowing amount, Council will note that it's $35 million when previous discussion indicated that we only needed to borrow $23.2 million. So a brief explanation of that. The $69.8 million that we're proposing to receive through grant funding, we don't get that money up front. We have to spend that money, and then on a quarterly basis, we submit grant claim forms for the province to reimburse us for that, the money that was spent. So in discussions with the Municipal Finance Authority, they suggested what some municipalities do is they'll increase the maximum amount that can be borrowed to an amount above what they need in order to accommodate some short-term cash flow, borrowing for short-term cash flow, just until those grant funds are received from the funder. So that's the purpose of that. We don't intend to borrow the $35 million over 30 years. It's just the $23.2 million that we're proposing to do that with. And just with regards to the borrowing, in reality, what we'll probably end up doing once we get approval on this loan authorization bylaw, once it's approved, we can adopt temporary borrowing bylaws that will allow us to borrow smaller amounts of money in increments as the money is spent. So rather than entering into a debenture debt issue, taking the whole long-term borrowing for the $23.2 million before we start construction or early in construction, we can enter into temporary borrowing bylaws where we just borrow the money in chunks. We're only obligated to make interest payments on those funds. Then once we get closer to the end of construction, we can convert that into long-term debt, at which time the interest and debt payments on the long-term kick in.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Jim. So this would be kind of loan authorization bylaw is quite similar to what we do every spring prior to our revenues coming in from taxation. Is that the case?
Yes, similar to that. Yeah, we're going to be doing that later this meeting as well.
Yeah, so it's up to a certain amount, but you don't have to use it if we don't have to.
Quite right, yeah.
Okay. Councillor Roberts?
Yes, Jim, so you've got flexible usage. Does that also mean you have flexible repayment as well? You don't have to like pay it back once a year. You can just pay it back when you get it?
With the temporary borrowing in advance of the long term, it's monthly interest only payments that we would make. And then once you actually enter into the long-term borrowing, you make interest payments twice a year and principal payments once a year.
Okay, thank you.
Further? Okay, next up, we have the Kimberley Land Development Reserve Fund Expenditure Bylaw for consideration of 3 readings. And the motion is that Council read Kimberley Land Development Reserve Fund Expenditure Bylaw number 2710, 2022, a first, second, and third time. Councillor Kiddo moves. Councillor Goodwin seconds. Call the question. Any opposed? That motion is carried.
Thank you, Council.
Next up is the Kimberley Revenue Anticipation Borrowing Bylaw for consideration of first, second, and third readings. And the motion specifically is the council grant first, second, and third readings to the City of Kimberley Revenue Anticipation Borrowing Bylaw. Councillor Goodwin moves. Councillor Dallum seconds. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion is carried. Gosh, I think that's it, Jim.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. Nice.
That was a ton of work and organization. Thanks to you and the rest of staff who worked on this. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Council.
Mr. Mayor, I
Go
think
ahead.
that means we're on our way,
Yeah, well, we
finally.
can only hope. I think it's important to note that projects like this, I mean, these are incredibly complicated projects, not just in terms of the construction of these things, but the financing and the processes that we have to go through to get there. It's local government, it's taxpayer money. There's just an awful lot to go through. And I know we've been talking about this for a long time, but it's important to note that the success of this will be measured in years from now, not months from now. Councillor Kiddo.
And this would be the largest capital project the City of Kimberley's ever undertaken, I'd think.
Certainly in today's dollars, no question about that, Councillor Kiddo, absolutely. Okay, next up we have a zoning amendment bylaw, and the motion specifically is the council approve first reading of the City of Kimberley Alpine Resort zoning bylaw number 2016. Motion, please. Councillor Kiddo, thank you. Councillor McBain seconds. Pardon me. Discussion. Who is this? Who's going to be speaking to this? Troy?
I can speak to that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, please, away you go.
You bet. Thank you very much. And if I may, I just would like to point out that this item is related to a development variance permit application that's on the agenda as well under item 2.2. And what I suggest is I'll try to provide the background and the context to both of those. Just I think it'll help for me to be able to explain to you, and we can certainly still deal with the permit later on. But
all right, excellent.
Yeah. So this this zoning amendment and the DVP and DP application that are mentioned on a separate agenda item relate to the proposed renovation and redevelopment at the Mountain Spirit Resort at the base of the ski hill. Council may recall the recent sale of Strata Lot 1 and Strata Lot 2, which is on the main floor on the ski hill side of that building. Those two spaces were initially developed in that project for proposed proposed restaurant space and a proposed spa space. And part of the reason those were included in there is because they're in fact required under the zoning bylaw. The way the zoning is set up in the core village area of the resort is it identifies that area as being kind of the core commercial service area, and the accommodation use being kind of the desired principal use, and actually by definition and by the way the zoning bylaw is set up, forces the requirement to include some additional accessory uses. So the normal things that would be provided for any hotel use, like a lobby area, but also has requirement for restaurant and conference use and entertainment facility, which is actually by definition more of a lounge. And then there's a section in the bylaw that actually prescribes a minimum amount of floor area for those uses. So as just to back to the Mount Spirit property, council knows the history on that is those spaces have sat empty ever since they were developed. They were never made any other improvements. They're just kind of an empty shell in each space, and eventually converted to the city through tax sale, and then the city did sell those The purchaser, their plan is to convert those 2 spaces into additional accommodation units. And there's a variance required for part of that in consideration. But also we're recommending that council consider some amendments to the bylaw. That application or that proposal at Mount Spirit is kind of the catalyst for us looking at this, but something that we've been looking at and identified here for a while that may be a bit of an obstacle for future investment in the resort core village area there. So this is really a series of text amendments that have been drafted here under bylaw 2712 to amend the Alpine zoning bylaw. The key amendment is to change the definition of resort hotel, and it's essentially changing one key word in there. The bylaw presently says, or the definition presently says, that it's a building used exclusively for temporary lodging of the general public, or payment for occupancies on a daily or weekly basis to the operator of the premises, which building must include, and then it goes on to list the various accessory uses that must be included in there. And what's being proposed under this text amendment is a change to change the word must to may, so that we still want to encourage, and it's good planning practice to encourage a mix of uses in development. It's certainly in a resort village core like in this setting. But in our view, any hotel proposal in the future is most likely going to have some of those accessory uses anyway, but maybe doesn't want to be forced to provide a prescribed, preset mix of uses or even a minimum prescribed amount of floor area for each use there. So that's the key one there. The other related amendments, there's related land use categories called lodge or inn, and a lodge use is resort by definition is a resort hotel that does not include an entertainment facility. And then there's the inn category is a resort hotel but does not include an area for an entertainment facility or a restaurant. And so the way the zones are set up, the lodge accommodation zones and the resort hotel accommodation zone, they either allow for a resort hotel and a lodge, or in some cases a resort hotel, lodge, or an inn. And again, that it kind of prescribes those, depending on which option, which use category someone chooses to develop, the other sections of the bylaw will prescribe what those minimum areas are for those uses. So with the text change to change must to may, it basically makes the 2 use categories of lodge and inn redundant. So there's a series of text amendments proposed in the bylaw to just delete those use categories and delete reference to them throughout the bylaw. And then there's a table that's set out in section 4053 of the zoning bylaw that prescribes those minimum size or the minimum floor area that should be developed for each of those accessory uses. So we're again recommending that table just be deleted. And then the other key one is one of the residential tourist accommodation zones, the RTA 4 zone, which applies to the North Star Mountain Village Resort. What we're actually proposing to add the resort hotel use category to that zone. And the main reason for that is just when the North Star Mountain Village Resort development was initially approved, in our reading and interpretation of the zoning bylaw, it doesn't perfectly match what's actually set out as a permissible use in the zone. The way that's set up is the North Star Mountain Village Resort is actually more of a resort hotel than it is a residential use with provision for tourist accommodation. So we're just trying to correct add that term to that zone to basically better reflect the development that we see there today and will continue to be there for many years, obviously, and to better reflect that approved development that was approved many years ago. So I think that's a good summary of the proposed zoning amendments here. We're recommending just a first reading at this time, and we'll be returning. We're proceeding, I guess, carefully, and here we just want to make sure we're thinking through all of those amendments and making sure we're not creating any other issues there. So we want to continue our review here in the next couple of weeks, and then come back for consideration of second reading at the next meeting. And we're at this point, we're not anticipating any changes. We think we have it right, but we wanted to allow ourselves a little extra time to just make sure we're going over that, and as well for council and anyone else that's looking through that, just to make sure there's a good understanding of what's being proposed.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Troy. I think, if we go back to 2004, 5, and 6 in that area when the resort was being built out, a lot of these definitions and expectations for what that might look like were based on other resorts, including places like Whistler or Sun Peaks that are more resorts. And what's proven over the last 15 years is something a little bit different. So that the changes that you're proposing here, I think, much better reflect and provide flexibility for not only where we're at, but where we could possibly go in the future. So that's excellent. Comments or questions, Council? Councillor Goodwin.
I seem to remember at the time there was concern expressed about putting more restaurants at the resort when we had lots of restaurants down in the Plateau, and it would be better to get people to go down and eat downtown. So, and now we have even more restaurants.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And in fact, if you talk to the folks from RCR in the day, there was explicit decisions made not to develop any commercial development up there because at the time, the Plaza was, struggling to transition from where it was at to something else. So there was a lot of cooperation between the developers up there and the retail entrepreneurs downtown. Good catch on that, Councillor Goodwin. I do have a question, Troy, and it's more a general question. What are there any implications, future implications for any of the properties that other than the definition change? Are there any material changes to anything that we should be aware of?
No, I think that the changes here are intended to, like we said, to better support investment in future development and in existing development, or in this particular case at Mount Spirit, the current proposal to renovate and redevelop part of that space. So it supports investment that way, and it improves the flexibility and the application of the zoning regulation. And basically, it's removing a perceived or actual barrier here in this case. But yet we're still maintaining, the intent and the objective, I think, of the original resort master plan and the OCP and the land use objectives set out there to make sure that resort core village area is that core key area for visitor accommodation and any supporting commercial services. So I think that the Mountain Spirit was kind of a test of that zoning regulation, and it's showing with so many years having gone by with no restaurant or spa development happening there, that we need that extra flexibility in the zoning. So it doesn't prevent a mix of uses in some future development, or it doesn't prevent the development of a restaurant or spa or other accessory use up there, but and those are still allowable under the way this is drafted, but it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't force that mix or that minimum floor space for that mix of uses.
Yeah, awesome. And 10 additional accommodation units up there is badly needed right now. We've been going backwards with respect to the number of accommodation units that we actually have up there for a whole bunch of reasons. And even though 10 is a relatively small number, it's definitely needed. Okay, any further discussion? So I will call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. All right, next up we have a signed development, a signed development variance permit for 317th Ave, 361 317th Ave, which is mini storage facility down in the Marysville Industrial Park. And the motion on the floor is that council defer decision and request applicant to provide an alternative plan for a replacement sign that complies with the bylaw requirements or reduces the scale and extent of non-conformance. Do I have a mover? Councillor Kiddo, thank you. Seconder? Councillor Oakley. Discussion. Go ahead, Troy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We just love talking about sign bylaws, don't we?
It's our favorite subject, I think. Yes. Yeah. So this application relates to a proposed sign replacement or renewal of sign at the business here at 361 317th Avenue. It's a self-storage business. There's been a recent change of ownership and change of business name. The new operator would like to replace and update the signage and replace as is to the existing sign that's been in place there for a while. We've gone through our records and haven't been able to find any record of authorization for that sign that's there. So we consider it existing unauthorized signage. And any new or replacement sign is always expected to comply with current bylaw requirements, and that existing sign is non-compliant on a number of fronts. The main obvious one being it's significantly over height from the bylaw requirements, and it's also got backlit as well, and surrounded by the landscape area at the base. So we've indicated to the proponents that the expectation is that the sign be revised and brought into compliance, or at least in reduced in scale and extent to be even better compliance. And the proponents there are hoping that council, I guess, will just support their plan to replace it and move forward with the variance as they've requested. Staff, of course, feels otherwise, that we should take advantage of this opportunity to have the signs updated and either made to comply or be brought into better compliance. The a few things I'll point out to council that we are anticipating, and we're starting to see already more and stronger interest in development and redevelopment within the Marysville Industrial Park area. There's been some discussion about capital plan improvements to upgrade infrastructure and upgrade the roads in this area, and that will certainly drive more development, and we'll start to see more redevelopment within this area. And it's obviously a very key gateway to the community, and very visible, and a key major opportunity for many people's first impression of the community. So we really think that it's important that council think through the implications, even though it seems like such a simple sign replacement. So as I mentioned, the applicant is insisting that we just allow a variance to allow the replacement of the existing non-conforming sign, but staff do request the council not deny the decision, but rather just defer and request that the applicant, or force the applicant to consider an alternative sign plan and work with staff to get something that's more approvable. The other comment I have there is I just think we should think about the actual use of the property. It's been a storage use for many years, and I think highly unlikely to change in any time in the near future on this particular property. And the storage use like that it's really not the kind of business that requires drop-in or drive-by customer traffic. It doesn't need to be attracting or requiring that kind of drive-by traffic. A simple address and business name identification at the front of the property, visible from the front street, doesn't need to be visible from the highway a couple hundred feet away. So I think that's part of the desire to see the sign reduced in size and scale and brought into better compliance with the bylaw.
Thank you, Troy. Councillor Roberts.
So Troy, if we make this comment to him that he needs to change it, what if he says, well, never mind then, I'll just leave it? Is there anything we can do at that point? Or is he just grandfathered until he needs to make a change?
Well, he needs our permission to replace and reuse the existing sign frame and put his new business name in the sign. So I suppose he could just leave the old sign business name up there in the interim. We could in fact take action on that because it's never been an authorized sign. It's been up there for a number of years, but like we said, it's our view. It's a really good opportunity to see the sign brought into compliance and just have the whole thing reassessed there.
Thank you.
Further questions? So I certainly would support the deferral, if only because I haven't had an opportunity to go down and really have a close look at the situation, and this will, give us an opportunity to make sure that as council we're educated on it as well. Any idea when this would come back?
I can't say for sure. Just depends on how quickly the applicant is willing to come up with an alternative plan that staff can support and make a recommendation to council.
Okay,
It could be at the next meeting. Might be a couple meetings.
Thanks for that, Troy.
You bet.
Councillor Goodwin.
Yeah, Troy, have we ever done any outreach with the sign companies and given them copies of our sign bylaw and guidelines and suggested to them when customers come to them, they could maybe steer the clients towards something they know is going to be compliant? I know we've done that with, construction companies for, building standards and whatnot.
Yes, we have had a number of conversations with sign makers, sign companies in the past. And I think, not to kind of point a finger or anything, I think they're responding to their customers' requests. I think they're well aware of what the sign requirements are, the sign bylaw requirements are, and I think they do their due diligence to inform their customers, their clients, of what those requirements are and what their options. And it's often the sign companies that are first identifying to the client that a variance or there might be issues with sign bylaw compliance. So I think they're doing their bit, and similarly the client they may be aware or become aware once they apply with us. But it's something we have worked on in the past, and we'll have to continue communicating on that as well. Excuse me.
Councillor McBain.
Yeah, just a general comment. I'm fine with deferring. I just think we need to be a little bit careful on trying to decide what a business needs or wants for their own particular business. Whether we, I understand trying to fit into, what our current bylaw says, but I think we've got to get away a little bit from trying to tell a business, well, you're this, so you only need this, because that's really not our business, in my opinion. So.
Thanks for that, Councillor McBain. Further? Okay, we'll call the question then. All those in favor of the deferral? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thanks, Troy. And last up is the development variance permit for 400 stem winder, which is the Mountain Spirit renovation, I guess, for lack of a better term. So the motion for the floor is the council instruct the corporate officer to issue notice to neighbors of 400 Stemwinder Drive of the intent to vary the Alpine Resort zoning bylaw to reduce the number of required parking spaces from 10 spaces to 0 to allow for the proposed renovation and increased number of accommodation units. Mover, Councillor Kiddo, thank you. Seconded, Councillor Goodwin. Discussion. I think it was pretty clear in the report, but if for public purposes, you could give a bit of a summary here, Troy, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think there's just a couple key things, excuse me, that I think would add some clarification. We are, or this is a bit confusing, I think, to some, because they're renovating, proposing to renovate spaces that were designated for restaurant and spa use. And I want to point out that the parking requirement for those commercial uses are actually greater than what would be required for the proposed accommodation units. So it's a bit unusual, but again, I'll have to look back at the original development approval on this site that did approve and allow for basically the parking on site to be maxed out. There's an underground parkade structure here underneath the facility, and there's just no ability to add more parking to this. But it was sized originally to reflect the proposed number of units that were developed at the time. And then there was actually a variance granted back then, excuse me, to to allow for off-site parking for those commercial uses. So the idea was is that there was day use visitor parking elsewhere at the resort village area that would provide for those commercial uses. And so we're at this with this application, we need to actually provide a variance or consider a variance to reduce the parking stalls from 10 down to 0, just reflecting the fact that there's no ability to provide on-site parking. But what we would point out to council is, we think there'll be minimal noticeable impact to the overall parking impact here if this proposal goes ahead and we see that development. Again, reflecting that the parking demand, I guess, if you will, that was approved off-site will actually be lesser demand for the proposed units here that are being built. Apologize for my voice going croaky on me here. One of the other points I wanted to make is this renovation plan has actually been broken into 2 phases, and part of that is the key part for that is to allow for time for council to consider the zoning amendment that was considered earlier. So phase 1 is actually to create 8 units within part of that space, and then there'll be a space that's actually left as future restaurant or proposed restaurant at this time until the zoning amendment is considered and if subsequently approved by council, then phase 2 would move forward. And we'll actually have to have another variance for those additional 2 or 3 accommodation units that would be built in under phase 2. So this may be returning back in the future yet again.
Glass of water? Yeah, perfect. Thanks for that, Troy. Questions? All right, hearing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Thanks, Troy.
Yes, thank
Appreciate
you
the,
for your support on all those. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, next up under new business, we have the water conservation plan update. As we saw and heard the presentation in our delegation earlier this evening, and we have, we do both these motions, Maurice, in one? Okay, we'll do it in 2 then, no problem. So the first is that council endorse the City of Kimberley's updated water conservation plan is attached to the senior manager of operations staff report in the agenda. Councillor McBain moves. Councillor Oakley seconds. Discussion. Any further discussion beyond our comments at the presentation? All right, all those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. And the second motion is that council directs staff to bring an updated water conservation plan back to a future meeting for consideration of approving the implementation of the recommendations contained in the report. Councillor McBain moves. Councillor Dallum seconds. Discussion.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that if we're going to put a renewed emphasis on outdoor watering restrictions and conservation, when we get the implementation plan, we need to be thinking about enforcement and whether we need a bigger budget for that or more help to get people to know what they should be doing. So anyway.
Thanks for that, Councillor Goodwin. Anything further? All those in favor? That motion is carried. All right, last up on the agenda is the check run, or a couple of check runs in the amount of $406,045.46. I have a mover, please. Councillor Roberts, as always, thank you for that motion, and seconded by Councillor McBain. Any unusual or non-routine would be the word, non-routines.
They're usually pretty routine, but there was one non-routine one, which it turns out to be rather appropriate that it should come on tonight's check run, which is about $44,000 spent to Gruderman's leak detection equipment.
Yeah.
So we're on it.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Councillor Roberts. Appreciate that. Was that the only item you
That
wanted
was
to
the only,
point out?
yeah, that's
Okay.
that was-
Anything further, council? All right, call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. We have 4 items of correspondence tonight. One for action. We'll deal with that one first, and that is an email from Russell Workin with regard to the poverty reduction plan that was received January 20th. Do we have any comments on this? Go ahead, Councillor Goodwin.
Well, I spent a bit of time trying to find the poverty reduction plan that's referred to in the first paragraph, but I couldn't because I don't think it's anywhere on the net yet. And it's not really clear for me what they're asking. I mean, we could pass a resolution saying we'll partner, but I have no idea from this letter what that's going to involve, how much staff time, or whether we have to second a counselor to the committee, or I don't know if Scott, if you've heard more about this than we have. It just seems a bit vague to me to be jumping in.
No, we don't know much more about it than what's in the letter. It was received very late, and as a courtesy, we put it on the agenda after our typical deadline. So very, very little staff information or input on this one.
Councillor Oakley.
I guess my concern would be when I read through the letter was the costing or lack of any idea around costing. So I just have some red flags going up around that.
Further? So sounds like what we need to do is to ask Russell to provide us with a little more detail so that we can. Go ahead, Scott.
Just to clarify, the deadline is February 11th. So council will not have an opportunity to pass a resolution to this effect, as our next meeting is February 14th.
Suggestions?
Am I going to be put on the spot again?
On the spot, Scott.
So in
Go ahead. Ken.
So in the letter, he allows that councils may not be meeting in time to make a decision, and if they could just tell him when they are going to be meeting, he will forward that information to the government. But
Yeah. So
I would like a bit more information.
this feels almost like a letter of support, but it's not.
If it just said
framed
that,
way.
yeah, if it just said moral support, and perhaps we could pass a resolution saying we have some agreement in principle or agreement, theoretical agreement to it, that wouldn't commit us to actually buying into a process that we don't understand yet. So I don't know.
Go ahead, Councillor Oakley.
This almost seems like it should be something that's going to arise and be discussed at UBC.
Oh, that's more regional.
I know, but it's tying, it's collaborative. So they're,
So,
you
so
know-
let's just get him to give us the information. We'll let him know that, we can't do it by February the 11th, but we want a couple of layers of detail. Council okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay, no action required there then. And the last 3 items, move receipt. Councillor Goodwin, thank you. And Councillor McBain seconds. Any comments? Hearing none, call the question. All those in favor of receipt? Motion is carried. Okay, that's it for the regular agenda. We will move on to question period, where members of the public can call in and ask any questions that relate to items on the agenda this evening. If you have a question or a comment, the number to call is 800-741-7180. And the meeting number when prompted is 2489-533-5295. So we'll give that a couple of minutes. And while we're doing that, we'll go around the table on councillor items, should there be any this evening. We'll start with Councillor Goodwin.
Yeah, I can't think of anything to report. We have a Health Center Society meeting on Wednesday night, and that's got a jam-packed agenda, but I have nothing to report on right now.
All right, thank you. Councillor Oakley.
Just a couple of small items for council to be aware. The deer count. I know you're all just barely hanging in there with anticipation, but the deer count number was 101. So to memorize that, just remember the movie The Dalmatians, right? 101.
And I don't think there's any doubt that there was another 100 or so that ran and hid on counting day. And I
Yeah.
mean that in all sincerity. I think the expectation was that the number is going to be a lot higher than 100, given that last year was 147. So, yeah, interesting.
And just so council's aware, the homework I've assigned myself with the Kimberley Mark Creek Integrated Management Plan, I did receive a hard copy from our amazing city manager, Scott, and I've been working my way through it, and I just want you guys to know that it's a serious headache it's given me, but I am hoping to get through it and try to formulate some plans for wildfire and climate change resilience into the watershed. So given that it has triggered a few things, conversations with the city manager, conversations with the mayor, and where to go. So I'll just keep you updated as I work through and plod through all that process. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Daryl. Jason.
Yeah, Kent already mentioned the Health Society meeting Wednesday night, so I'll be a part of that. The other, well, the main thing that's been going on is the library committee. I'm sure a lot of folks in the public have heard rumblings of issues going on there. And then just in the considering the sensitivity of the nature of the discussions going on with the committee, I'm just going to keep any comment on that, you know, down right now. But we are still going through all of the data and all the input and just trying to process everything that's happening. But yeah, I think I just keep it at that for now.
Thanks, Jason. Councillor Roberts, you've been away.
I've been away. I'm scheduled for a nature park meeting this month. Oh, this week, actually, Thursday. So I'll have something to report then. That's it for
Thank
me.
you. Nigel.
Nothing to report, Mr. Mayor.
A couple things to report. One is Christine Bezold of Center 64, after 10 years of being the head administration there, is retiring. And they have a, excuse me, they have a new young face, Corinne from Wildsite, is going to be taking that position and bringing a lot of passion forward. There's considerable excitement. The transition is happening currently, and the two of those ladies are working together to get that going really well. The other side of things is the trails. So the parks, the Snow Dog, as many people have enjoyed the groomed trails in the backcountry. So the Kimberley Trail Society is looking at ways to fund a potential second Snow Dog and cover even more ground of groomed trails for folks to enjoy. So that's what's happening in those realms.
All right, excellent. Thanks for that, Kyle. Couple of major activities to report on for myself over the last couple of weeks. Scott, Chris Mummery and I met with Katie Ward, who's the regional manager for MOTI, Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. We met with Katie and her staff. Basically picked up on what we were doing with Ron Sharp when he was here, meeting about every 6 months. We've got a laundry list of things that are, you know, we want to keep moving forward. We have that list, we work through it. And even though we've got staff to staff a really good working relationship, I think we find that that these meetings with Katie are really important in keeping the visibility up on things that we need to get done by the Ministry of Transportation. I thought it was an excellent meeting. And we did walk away with a fairly long list, confirmed list that we are working through. I had regional district East Kootenay meetings on Thursday and Friday. Wow, it was a long couple of days. Development out in the Kootenays is never easy when it comes into, into the rural areas. We must have had 4 hours worth of delegations coming in on a development that is happening out in Fernie. It was really taxing. But it's democracy in action, and we work our way through those things. I also had a meeting with that was spearheaded by the Pulp and Paper Council with Minister Conroy of Flynn Road with regard to pulp mills and sawmills and their access to fiber, and some of the programs that the industry wishes to see the government keep in place, those that have been expiring, to help make access to fiber not only profitable but keep a lot of the industry working. They're estimating that 2 or 3 pulp mills, a number of sawmills are going to close without some further action on this. And I know here in Kimberley, the Skookumchuck pulp mill, I think, is our 3rd largest employer here in Kimberley, and it's something that we normally don't get a lot of visibility to. There's between 80 and 95 people living in Kimberley that actually work out at the pulp mill. So it was an excellent meeting. I think the minister understands, full well. She comes from forestry background and really understands what the issues are, and it was a really good meeting. By the way, that meeting was a result of that request that came before council several meetings ago, before Christmas, with regard to the coalition. So it has moved forward in a pretty positive manner. I had last week off mostly. I had my youngest son and his family here and got completely run into the ground by my 5-year-old grandson, which was awesome. So today was first day back, and if today is any indication, 2 weeks from now at the next meeting, I'm going to have an awfully long list of things to report on. So Maurice, do we have anybody on the line?
We don't have anybody on the line, Mr. Mayor.
All right, hearing none, we do have in camera this evening with a number of items. So if I could have a mover to move in camera. Councillor McBain, thank you. Councillor Roberts seconds. All those in favor? The motion is carried. So we'll take 1 minute to disconnect from YouTube and then move to in camera. Thanks, folks, for taking the time to be part of our council meeting this evening.